Morning, everybody out there in Facebook land. We apologize for the technical difficulties we're having right now, so we can't broadcast live, but we are recording this webinar so that it'll be available to you later today. Thank you very much, Chuck, for joining us. Chuck's been a CPA in Percy, I'm told. He just told me it since 1991, and if I do my math right, that's almost 30 years. So we appreciate your time and expertise on this very important matter, Chuck. Thank you.
Sure.
Could you start off and give us a brief overview of what the Paycheck program is and who it is intended to help?
When Congress initiated the program, one of my favorite quotes came out of an article I read, and they said, quote, "The intent of this act is that the SBA provide relief to America's small business community expeditiously." How they do that is, how they intended to do that is by giving lenders more delegated authority and streamlining the requirements of the regular 7A loan program. So basically the lenders are being allowed by the SBA to rely on certifications that a borrower might make when they submit the application, and the lenders use those certifications and the information that's provided by the borrower to basically get a warm feeling about that application and that it's it is accurate prior to its submission to the SBA. The loan program itself, let me start by giving I did this for my own edification as I started going through this over the last 4 months. I made a list of key dates, and the key dates are as follows. February 15th. February 15th is a date where a borrower or a business is supposed to answer or certify to the SBA by way of the application that they were operational and they were, quote, ramped up on this date, meaning they had employees, they were paying salary, wages, etc. On March 27th, Congress passed the bill and it was signed. On April 3rd, submissions were started, and that's the infamous a week ago when a lot of things hit the fan at the same time, and a lot of lenders were trying to serve their customers by doing the best they can with guidance that had not yet been complete, and not through anybody's fault. It was just everybody was trying to hit the ground running real fast. So those applications started getting submitted on April 3rd. Small businesses and sole proprietors were actually submitting them. A week later, which is today, is the second date. Today, quote, independent contractors and self-employed individuals are allowed to submit loan applications. June 30th. June 30th is a key date. It's the last date that a borrower can restore, quote unquote, restore full-time employment and payroll levels that may have been impacted during the period of February 15th to April 26th. Why April 26th is picked, I don't know, but that's the period. If you've affected your own workforce by furloughing or laying off people or reducing pay, you have now until June 30th in order to restore that and be in compliance with the loan provisions under this PPP program. June 30th is also the last date you can apply. So you can apply today, you can apply anytime between now and June 30th. The key thing is, obviously, will there be any money left? And we probably will talk about that later in the program. LDD is my acronym for calling the date that funds are released to a borrower after obviously a loan approval. I call it LDD. It's called the loan disbursement date. The LDD is key because the it drives what I would call the period of time that you can expect to get your funds, because 10 days after the loan, I'm sorry, 10 days, that's accrual date, my mistake. 8 weeks from the loan disbursement date, 8 weeks after the loan disbursement date is a key period where the borrower is supposed to document what did they lose, what did they spend the loan money on. And it obviously has to be accepted costs, which we'll probably get into later on in the session. So the loan disbursement date initiates that period of 8 weeks that a borrower documents what they did with the funds or what they are spending the money on. And then another thing that the LDD does is it drives when does the payment start. And the LDD plus 6 months is when your first payment would be due. It's called the deferral period from LDD plus 6 months. That's when your first payment would be due. LDD also drives the earliest point at which you can apply for loan forgiveness. And it's either LDD plus 8 weeks in a day. But if your 8 weeks in a day happens to precede June 30th, I believe that you have to wait until June 30th in order to make the application to your lender for the loan forgiveness. Last thing is, it's not a date, but it's just, as I said earlier, it's between the loan disbursement date to the end of June, but you are allowed to spend those loan funds on what's called allowable costs. Those are the key dates. As far as the other things that I think are critical about the program, I mentioned when the deferred payment is to start, which 6 months after the LDD. The other critical quote terms or points about the program is that the interest rate is 1%. The term of the loan is 2 years, and your first payment, as I said earlier, your first payment would not be due until 6 months after that. Those are the critical points, or the key points I have about the program.
That's great. Thank you very much. Now, we've heard talk about something called the disaster loan advance payment. How is that affected, or how does that affect the PPL?
The disaster loan advance payment is it's a part of what the SBA calls the disaster loan application program. Some people call it EIDL, emergency. I don't know what the I stands for, but it's emergency disaster loan. If you apply for that advance payment, which is a short application, you are technically supposed to get those funds $10,000 max. $10,000 max. They could authorize to give you less, but the maximum you can get is $10,000. That is in essence an emergency advance for you to spend it in this quote emergency and this disaster. How it affects the PPL program, if you were successful in acquiring the $10,000, if you received a $10,000 advance or less, and in the time frame of January 31 to April 3rd, if you applied for a PPP loan during that period, if your EIDL, or your advance payment, was not used for payroll, it will not affect your eligibility for the loan. That's one thing I read and I found interesting. If you use the $10,000 or less that you had received, and you did not use it for payroll costs, it still does not affect your eligibility for the PPP loan. Number two, if that EIDL advance or loan was used for payroll costs, your PPP loan must be used to refinance that advance. And what that means is if you get approved for X amount of, let's just say you get approved for $20,000, picking a number out of thin air, $20,000 for a PPP loan, and you happen to receive an advance based on your payroll of $3,000. What they will do is they will deduct the 3 from that 20 and just give you 17. That's what they mean about refinancing it. And that's if you had used the 10,000 or less advance payment for payroll. If you do get an advance, it does not have to be repaid. It does not have to be repaid. However, it will be deducted from your loan forgiveness amount on the PPP loan. You're not required to repay it, but if you happen to get the PPP loan and you apply for forgiveness, the rule I read was it will be deducted from the forgiveness amount that might be approved by the lender.
Okay, that makes sense.
Those are the key facts that I have on how that affects it.
Okay. Can you go over again, what can the PPL funds be used for?
The PPP funds are used for payroll costs, which obviously is salary, wages, tips, payments. It can be used to pay for continuing group health care benefits for the employees that you have, for example, insurance premiums. It can be used for mortgage interest payments. Mortgage interest payments. It cannot be used for mortgage principal payments.
Okay.
Interest payments. It can be used to pay for rent. It can be used for utility payments, water, sewer, trash, those kinds of things. It can also be used for interest payments on debt obligations, like operational debt obligations that the borrower had incurred before February 15th. So if you have operational debt that is financing operations, you can use the PPL loan for interest payments on that debt if it was incurred before February 15th. Those are the key operational costs that you could spend it on.
And again, the first deadline last Friday was for small businesses. Today is for independent
contractors and sole proprietors or self-employed.
Okay.
Now, many, if I could digress here for a moment, you won't find a specific definition that describes, quote, self-employed individuals, independent contractors, and last week, quote, small employers. I tried finding a specific definition because I know that a lot of the people that are observing this are sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute, I consider myself self-employed. I also consider myself an independent contractor, but I applied last week and they accepted the application. Well, the SBA has a lot of guidance, but it's pretty hard to nail down a specific definition. I did read an article by, I wish I could remember his name, by a gentleman who invests and spends a lot of time dealing with the SBA. And he learned, this is how he defines these 4 or 5 terms. And he said, it's based on my collective experience over the last 15 to 20 years. Last week, April 3rd, applications were submitted for, quote, businesses. And that would include, corporations like C Corps or S Corps, perhaps even general partnerships that had employees. And also what is called, quote, small business self-employed. And what that is if it's somebody that's self-employed, considers them a Schedule C client or a SMLLC, and listeners might recognize what those are. if you had employees and you were a single member LLC or sole proprietor or self-employed and you had employees, you would be considered this, quote, small business, and you would have applied last week. This week, if you're self-employed and you do not have employees, today's your date.
Okay.
Self-employed would be somebody that, prepares a Schedule C. However, the SBA also uses this term for independent contractors, and an independent contractor is somebody that is described in the, quote, general economy as a gig employee. So think of it this way: a gig employee is if somebody played the guitar and went out and hit a restaurant up, and then this weekend hit a couple of lounges and was basically playing gigs. That's what a gig employee is. You could have 7 gigs throughout the day, depending on who calls you to deliver something. That's 7 gigs. They probably file, or should file, a Schedule C tax return, collecting all of that revenue and deducting their expenses. The differentiation between that gig employee and the self-employed that's going to file for a PPP loan today, April 10th, would be a self-employed individual will likely get a 1099 from, some of the customers or people that they work for. A gig employee will not, but a self-employed potentially will. Mm-hmm. That's how the SBA differentiates those entities.
So people in our audience should recognize themselves by some of those descriptions that you just gave us.
Correct.
Based on their individual situations. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, since last Friday, I've talked to a number of business owners who just feel like they're overwhelmed by the amount of paperwork that's required. I know the SBA has made a big deal about the fact that their application is only 2 pages, which is great, except that it probably requires 50 pages of documentation at least to go along with it. Right. So why are the lenders asking for these kind of documents? Are they recalculating, replicating, or auditing the data? Why are they sometimes asking for more information after a business owner has already given them everything that they thought was required?
The SBA guidelines on what they've done in the way of delegating this responsibility to the lenders is they have tasked. They have tasked the lenders with the responsibility to evaluate the borrower's eligibility. In the context of that phrase, they are tasked with the responsibility to reasonably confirm that the payroll costs are accurate. So what we may determine or interpret as being you're raking me over the coals and giving you all of this paper, they are perceiving and looking at it from the standpoint of, how do I confirm in a reasonable fashion that the average payroll costs for the preceding calendar year are reasonable, to support this number that's being asked to substantiate 2.5 times or 250% for a loan amount. So the borrower is responsible, quote unquote, responsible to provide an accurate calculation of the payroll costs. That's the responsibility of the borrower. The lender has to get a warm feeling about it. Now, does that mean because they're asking for more data, they're not getting a warm feeling? No. They have their own internal guidelines as well in order to determine, the borrower's capability of repaying the loan and the borrower's eligibility to get the loan. I prefer to look at this as, or the phrase I used the other day was, look, blankety blank blank. Look, don't look at the lender as your enemy. The lender is not your enemy. The lender has a task to do, and they're going about doing it in what they understand and perceive is the best way under the, quote, borrowing guidelines and protocols that they have at the institution that they work for, and also the SBA guidelines as they've released them to the lenders. So are they recalculating? No. They're trying to get an understanding of how you, the borrower, arrived at the payroll cost. Are they auditing it? No. They're just getting to the point of saying, how did you arrive at this number? That's all they're doing, is asking for. They're, you know, it's a good faith review. That's what it is, in a reasonable time. And if there appears to be any inconclusive data, or the numbers don't appear to be supported by certain documents, and it might be incomplete, the lender, I haven't had one instance in talking to people over the last 7 days, I haven't had one instance where an incomplete application was automatically rejected. It's like, no, you cannot apply, or you will, or I'm putting it at the bottom of the pile. Every instance where I've either talked to a lender or I've talked to a borrower, and it was a situation where data was incomplete, I had lenders bending over, responding to emails, even early into the evening, and sending documents through drive-through tubes so that they can be scanned in a branch because the borrower doesn't have a scanner. I've seen that kind of cooperation between the lending community and the borrowers.
I will say I've talked to a number of lenders in the area. They all seem to be anxious to approve borrowers and to do whatever they can to get the supporting documentation. So
Right.
I will give them a shout out for that. I will also say that, some of them have been asked to process hundreds of applications since last Friday, when in the past they may only been dealing with dozens of applications over the same period of time. So they've been completely overwhelmed, and from what I've understood, they have tried to bend over backwards to get the supporting documentation so they can get the information to the SBA and get it approved. I've also heard from borrowers who say, hey, the government's giving me free money, I'll fill out any paperwork that I can that I need to do, right? So if the government's willing to help me out, I'll provide them with that paperwork. So I think that's probably the best attitude to have. Do what you need to do and get the help that you need. Okay, so I'm a
I will postscript that if I can. There are some instances where borrowers have been asked for corporate documents, or documents that seem out of the ordinary, to the borrower, and I've begun to classify those kinds of requests into two areas. One, let's just, for example, say it's a corp or an S corp, and the borrower has an existing relationship with the lender, and in order to comply with the SBA guidelines, when they submit their loan package, they have to provide certain documents. And I haven't proven this, I'm suspecting this, that maybe one of the documents or some of the documents is show us the articles of incorporation for this particular corp, or show us something else that tells us, this is the corp. And the lender has gone back into the files and realized, we don't have a copy. And they've been tasked with, all right, contact the borrower and say, hey, you know what? We don't have a copy of this. Can you get it for us? For whatever reason. And I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just thinking, why are we asking about this? And that's one possible situation. With an existing relationship, they just don't have the documents there. Number two, it could be that, the borrower never got the documents to them, or whatever. It doesn't matter what the reason is, it's just not there. Second thing is, if it happens to be a new relationship between borrower and lender, well then, without a doubt, the lender is going to ask for substantive documents that prove you are who you are. The articles of incorporation, the bylaws, show us your EIN number. The EIN number, I think, is important because I believe when it hits the SBA, that's what they're going to use to identify this, this project, this loan, as it goes through the process. I could see the SBA saying, yeah, we know you're telling us it's the EIN number for this entity. Send us the IRS document, the confirmation document that says this is the EIN. send that to us.
It's due diligence on the part of the bank to make sure
Exactly.
that you are who you say you are and you do what you say you do.
Right.
Which makes sense. They don't want to do that. And one thing I will tell you that in my conversations with a number of lenders is they are hesitant to deal with new customers at this particular time on this particular program. Only one that I'm aware of is accepting applications from non-customers at this time. But at this point,
I've a limited number, but I've got two that are talking to new customers.
okay, it's individual situations. So
Yes, it
okay,
is.
I'm a small business owner. I've submitted all my paperwork. How long till I hear if I've been approved, and how long till I get my funds?
I can't say I don't see any rule on answering number one. Like, when are you going to hear? Interestingly, there's an article in today's Philadelphia Inquirer, Section A, I think it's Section 8, the business section, page 15. They've got 7 or 8 different individuals that were interviewed for the article. And some of them had some really good experiences. And I skeptically looked at them and said, yeah, I could see that because you're so large. I could see the skids being greased for you. There are some other bad war stories, inside that article. But what I saw was that there is no promise, there is no expectation. On your second point, your second question, if you're approved, when will you receive the funds? I believe it's 10 days from the approval date to the disbursement date is the maximum period. So from loan approval to 10 days later, within that time frame, you should have your check, your money deposited, et cetera.
Okay. So assume, and I think you've already covered this in some respect, but let's go over it again. Assume I'm a small business owner. When can I apply for loan forgiveness, and how do I go about doing that? How do I make sure that I'm forgiven for this loan?
Good point. The first thing that I would do is start now, and this is what I mean. I spoke with 2 people yesterday, and I started describing to them, one of which, for the lack of a better term, has more important things to do. Get jobs done, complete jobs. I've got to make my money now between now and August. So the record keeping, might wait till September, as long as I'm paying my bills. Well, I've told anybody that'll listen to me, I said, if you're going to talk about getting loan forgiveness, you have to start thinking about it now. You need to think about it while you're filling out the application. You need to think about it before you get your funds, because you have to document, okay, for your own peace of mind, you have to document that you are spending this money during this period of time, 8 weeks after the disbursement date, that you are spending this money on these things, and that's what's going to be submitted to the lenders. Your forgiveness application is going to be submitted to the lenders, and they'll review it and pass it on to the SBA. Okay. That's why I'm saying start now. So what do? Document. It's going to save a lot of headaches for yourself and anybody else that might be helping you in order to get that loan forgiveness process, whether it be the lender or somebody else. It's going to be imperative for a successful application. The borrower, when they submit this loan forgiveness document, which I have not seen yet, I don't know what it looks like, but the borrower has to provide a certification. And basically that means, I promise, this is what I did, this is what I spent it on, and I did it during this 8-week period. That does not preclude that the lender is going to ask for the documentation. Once again, not to audit it, not to replicate it, not to calculate it. They just want to make sure that you've got the documents to support this, because the lender also has to certify to the SBA that it's a reasonable request.
What happens if my loan isn't forgiven? What do I do then?
If it's not forgiven, it will go back to following the PPP loan terms, which means you'll have to pay it. Your first payment will be 6 months later. It'll be 1%, and it'll be paid off 2 years or less.
Okay. So then it just becomes a
It
regular
just
loan
becomes a loan.
and an obligation of your company.
Correct.
Now, $349 billion is a lot of money. Is it enough? Is it going to be enough to satisfy all the needs of small businesses throughout this whole country?
This is only my opinion. No. The small business, and I don't, well, the SBA and Congress will define small business as some of those people that are on page 15 of the Inquirer article I read today. I prefer to look at small business as the Penn Ridge area.
Right.
We don't have, that I know of, $100 million businesses here. Okay. The crux of this economy, the crux of the U.S. economy is being driven on the backs of small businesses that you see around this area. And will there be enough money there? I don't think so, because I've heard and read a number of people that are smarter than I am saying this is going to be used up in weeks. So here's my point. If number one, don't get disillusioned that you may not get the loan. That's not gloom and doom. What I'm saying is I believe Congress is going to come to its senses, and it's going to approve or put out another package making it available to small business. Even if they're going to do it for their own political survival, and it's not really other centered on small business, they're still going to do it in order to maintain, their jobs. So everything that you're doing now, let's say that you still are missing documents. Let's say you still have to get things put together. Continue doing that and continue getting that package complete, so that when the additional funds come out, if we happen to use up the $349 billion, when those funds come out, you'll be ready to attack the second wave. That's my opinion.
Right. So whether you've applied by now or not, you still, and it would be retroactive back to that February 15th date, correct?
Correct.
No matter when you apply, it's retroactive to February 15th.
Yes.
If you feel like you missed any deadlines to this point, you really haven't. Get it in June 30th. I think you said was the
June 30th is the cutoff. You can apply all the way up to then.
Okay, that's good. All right. So we had two questions that came in before this little seminar. So I want to run those by you right now. Question: can I get PPP and PADECD loan, the Workforce Capital Program? What about FFCRA? How about the SBA EIDLEA? Does getting one preclude you from getting another, I guess is the basic question.
Theoretically, I don't believe that the DCED working capital loan would preclude you from getting a PPP loan.
Okay.
From what I read on that program. I will say though that that program has been closed.
Right, I understand
as
that.
Of this morning.
That was $100 million that was allocated pretty quickly. That
right. Honestly, I have no idea what FFCRA is, so I really couldn't speak to that. Family First Act. Oh,
whether there's any funding involved in that or not, but I think that's more of regular of how you have to deal with employees.
There is a connection between that and the family. If you pay for family leave, and there's some family leave credits, I would probably be wrong trying to quote what may affect that. So I'll just plead ignorance, and if somebody wants to contact me after this, I'll do whatever I can to answer that question if it's just one or two people.
Sure. Do you want to give a contact information for you if people do have questions?
Yeah, cjo@ozec.com. It's my email address.
Great. Thank you very much.
cjo@ozeck.com.
Great. And one other question that came in, and I guess we have some potential scofflaws in our community because they want to know if they violate the stay-at-home rule by keeping their business open, will they be denied any state or federal assistance? Would that?
I can't say that they would preclude you from doing it. If it was so serious and a grievance that they committed, there's something within the PPL application that says you can't commit a felony or you're incarcerated. Well, yeah, then I would say, yeah, it affects you. But the fact that you're not staying at home and you're operating a business that may not be essential,
Right.
does it preclude you? No, because nowhere on the application does it ask you whether you're doing that or not.
Okay.
And I haven't seen anything on the SBA guidelines or the SBA website that precludes you from doing that.
Okay. Well, that's a lot of information. You've really summarized it, I think, in a way that we can understand it and act on it. We appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has questions for me, my name's Joe Ferry, director at Percy Town Improvement Associate, ASSC.com. Be happy to filter those questions to whoever might be able to answer them for you.
I think Rose has one.
Go ahead, Rose.
I see two on Facebook that look
Okay.
a little bit different, so can I just read them?
Sure, please do.
Sure.
All right, just bear with me here. Whoops. Let me click OK here. Let me click on here. Okay. So how would applications differ for a sole proprietor versus an LLC sole member? I've heard that any involvement in the $10,000 immediate loan EIDL forgiveness program is very likely to trigger an IRS audit. What can you tell us about that? That's all the first question.
Will it trigger an IRS audit? I don't believe so, but that's really my opinion. I don't have anything empirical to tell you that. IRS audits, they rarely have a human being sitting down at a desk saying, let's do this. And if they kick out the $10,000 as some sort of anomaly, not an anomaly, an algorithm within their audit parameters, I wouldn't understand why they would do that, because the $10,000 is supposed to be tax-free. Then the first question was,
how would applications differ for a sole proprietor versus an LLC sole member?
I don't believe they would be any different, because a single member LLC is what's called a disregarded entity. And when a single member LLC gets to the point of preparing a tax return, they're preparing the Schedule C, which is what a self-employed individual does. My understanding, this is a good question because I did not cover this in any of the material we spoke about. The self-employed individuals, when they fill out this application, it appears to me that what they are presenting in the application is what their net profits are from their business. I haven't seen anything that says document to us the draws, which is not payroll, but for the lack of a better term, that's the money, the personal money that a SMLLC member or a sole proprietor would be taking out of the business to run their household budget. Much like a net payroll, but it's not payroll. It's not payroll. But in order to apply for the loan and for the SBA to determine what kind of a loan should we give this individual so as business stays in business, they have to evaluate something. And the only thing I could think of is that the sole proprietors or the SMLLC is to provide data in the loan application that shows what their net profit is what their net profit is in order to support what they potentially would be taking to run their own business as well, run their business as well as run their own household, like we would for payroll, which is what they're trying to do, is keep payroll funded so we can keep get the economy started again.
Okay. Rose, do you have that other question?
I do. Is PPP something I should or could do if currently only 2 employees on payroll, both of which are owners?
Yes, you can. As long as on February 15th you were operational. On February 15th they were employed and they were being paid payroll. Then as part of the application you go back 12 months and you create all this data for the payroll costs. But yes, that based on that question, it appears as though they're a corp. Yes.
I'll add to that question. And I know of a particular situation where there's 2 owners operating a business but not taking any salary, are they eligible for any kind of PPL?
I don't believe so. In that scenario, if there is no payroll,
Right.
you don't have any payroll costs that you're going to replace. In that case, I would look at alternatives like the disaster loans.
Okay. And that's what covers things like mortgage interest and utilities and things like that would
Yes.
get them through. Okay. All right. Good. Rose, any other questions?
Not that I'm seeing, no.
Okay. Chuck, again,
Yep.
very much appreciate your time, your expertise. I think we gave people a good idea of what's out there and how to go about it, how to take advantage of it. And hopefully we don't have to do this again, but if we do, we'll certainly give you a call.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
All right. Good day.
Good day, everybody.
Okay, thanks.